Well, hello everyone. I'm Heidi Haley Franklin. I'm the Vice President of Programs at the Alzheimer's Association. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon and for this morning. What a great conference. We're so delighted that we were invited to speak and glad that you're all here. I have the pleasure of introducing Madeline Iverson. And Madeline, do you want to tell the group who you are?
So I'm a Master's of Social Work student at the University of St. Thomas, and I'm doing my internship with the Alzheimer's Association. So I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, we're grateful for Madeline and for all of the work that she assists with at the association this year. So today we're going to be talking about managing money, a caregiver's guide to finances. And before we begin, I always like to take a little inventory of who we have in the room and just curiosity of how many of you have either been personally impacted by Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, or maybe professionally or maybe casually impacted by the disease. Show of hands. So yes, looks like everybody in this room either knows someone or has been connected to someone at some point with dementia, myself included. I've been at the association for 18 years. However, when I first started at the association, I was a social worker. I worked with families and had a lot of professional experiences working with caregivers and people themselves who have dementia. But I didn't have a personal connection. And then fast forward into about 8 years into my career at the Alzheimer's Association, and we first started noticing symptoms in my mom, who lived in Arizona. So I was a long-distance caregiver for a few years until we were able to move her back to Minnesota, where she grew up and where the rest of our family is. So I joined the ranks of a caregiver, and a lot of what we've been talking about today certainly resonates with me personally and of course professionally in my work as, a program leader at the Alzheimer's Association. And this program hopefully will give you some ideas on how to help either help person living with dementia on managing their money, or maybe if you don't have somebody impacted by dementia in your life. I think all of these tips that we're going to talk about really apply to everyone, because everybody has money and everybody, should be thinking ahead to their financial futures. So before we jump in, I am a social worker. I am not a lawyer. I'm not a financial planner. So what we're going to give you are certainly some tips and strategies. But if you have specific questions about estate planning or financial planning, it's best to consult with someone who is from those particular areas. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So I just want to acknowledge the steering committee that put this presentation together. I won't name all of the organizations and individuals, but they played a huge role in helping us put together this presentation. So you can see that there are a number of financial organizations and certainly caregivers, along with banking organizations and the National Alliance for Caregiving. They all contributed to this effort. So today, in this session, we are going to talk about a number of learning objectives, and we're going to talk about how caregiving affects finances. Certainly, again, no matter if you're a caregiver or care partner of someone with dementia or another chronic condition, caregiving can be expensive. So we're going to talk about all of those things, along with the legal and financial documents that people should have in place as they are aging. Certainly it's something that my husband and I have done in terms of healthcare directives and power of attorneys, those types of things, but we're going to talk a little bit about those documents that we should have in place as we're all getting older. Also, give you some tips on how to prepare for those discussions about financial decisions and planning with the individual themselves. Certainly, sometimes those conversations go easier than others, and we'll give you some ideas on how to start those conversations, followed by steps to lower the chances of financial abuse and fraud. Certainly, that plays a huge role in today's society, unfortunately. And then finally end with discussing how to create a backup plan in case there's an emergency or in case the caregiver or care partner isn't able to fulfill that role any longer. So just to set the stage on some key words that we'll be talking about today, we'll use the word caregiver, and a caregiver refers to anyone. It could be certainly a family member, it could be a friend, it could be a legal guardian, but basically anybody who supports the person with their health needs, and then maybe their activities of daily living like bathing or eating, those types of things. Care partner is someone who is partnering alongside the person who has dementia. So typically when we talk about care partner, it's in reference to somebody living with very early stage Alzheimer's or early stage dementia. It's somebody that may not necessarily need like hands-on care or care with bathing or showering or all of those types of things. It might just be somebody that walks alongside and provides some reassurances, or just make sure that things are okay with that person. And then finances. Again, finances are money and things that are certainly worth money. So like bank accounts, maybe financial investments, real estate, property, those types of things. And then financial literacy is understanding how to manage money. And it's everything from managing the day-to-day expenses to planning for the cost of care or planning for the future. So now I'm going to turn it over to Madeline.
So our first thing we'll be covering is the cost of caregiving. So our financial decisions and actions can have a significant impact on our lives, both now and in the future. Financial literacy is especially important for caregivers, no matter which illness the person they care for is living with, because it provides them with the knowledge and skills needed to better support themselves and others. So let's see what you know about the cost of caregiving. So, for checking your knowledge, what percentage of caregivers have out-of-pocket costs as a result of caregiving? I'll give you a few moments to think about it. Raise your hand if you think that it is 47%. 67? 78? Okay. 95? All right. We'll see what the right answer is. So the correct answer is 78. According to the AARP, more than 3/4 of caregivers have out-of-pocket costs as a result of caregiving. And this includes household expenses like mortgage payments and home modifications, as well as home expenses like co-payments, medical equipment, and travel to doctor's appointments. So caregiving can impact finances in a number of ways. And because of the intense amount of time people spend providing care, caregiving may affect a person's employment. And many caregivers end up cutting their hours, taking time off, retiring early, or quitting their jobs. These decisions can mean lost income, more debt, difficulty saving for retirement, or cutting back on other costs. And many people don't realize how expensive it can be to take care of others. So we'll hear from a real-life example on this.
So some of the sacrifices I've had to make financially due to having to care for my mom were things like paying for some of her care, doctor visits in some cases, clothing, to try to limit the spend down of her money. So I supplemented where I could, and then retired early, which impacted my income to continue to care for her, and then looking into getting a part-time job to supplement her memory care, facility care.
So caregiving and managing financial challenges can also have a major impact on the caregiver's own health due to high levels of burden, exhaustion, and uncertainty and stress. Caregivers may put off taking care of their own needs by skipping medical appointments, not getting enough sleep, or ignoring symptoms of physical and mental health concerns. So when caregivers don't take care of themselves, their own health can get worse, and this can lead to additional medical expenses.
All right. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how Alzheimer's disease affects finances. And before I do that, we have another kind of check your knowledge question here. How many of you think that Alzheimer's is a normal part of aging? Raise your hand if you think that that is true. All right. And how about false? Good, I'm glad, because the answer is false. And I'm sure because you all have had a connection to the disease that you are aware that Alzheimer's is a progressive and fatal brain disease and is not a normal part of aging. So I'm glad to hear that and see that you all know that. While we know that the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's is increasing age, the disease certainly is not a normal part of aging. And most people that have Alzheimer's or another form of dementia are over the age of 65. However, there are also many people who have Alzheimer's that are younger than 65, and that is called younger onset Alzheimer's disease. So let's do another check your knowledge question. First of all, the question is, Alzheimer's only affects a person's memory. If you think that's true, please raise your hand. All right, how about false? You guys are experts. You should be up here talking about this topic. The answer, of course, is false. Alzheimer's impacts a person's memory, but it also includes the person's thinking and behavior, and that also includes managing money. So just a little bit about the disease progression. Certainly at the Alzheimer's Association, we refer to Alzheimer's progressing slowly in 3 stages: early, middle, and late. And an individual with Alzheimer's usually lives between 4 and 8 years after diagnosis. However, I think that we should put a little asterisk by that because oftentimes many people aren't diagnosed with the disease until kind of in those middle stages. So it sort of skews how long a person can live with the disease. We've heard of people that actually who have been diagnosed early in the disease process that can live, 10, 15, 20 years after the diagnosis. And of course, it depends on a lot of other factors such as age or other comorbid conditions on how long a person typically lives with the disease. But we know that as a person advances through the disease process, their care needs increase, and so does the cost of providing care. So in the beginning, people with Alzheimer's or another dementia might have trouble managing their money or remembering to pay the bills. And as the disease continues to progress, they will no longer be able to communicate their wishes or make financial decisions. And so that early planning really does become important so that the person has the ability to express how they want their future care to be delivered and just participate in sharing all of their preferences for how the disease progresses. And certainly in my mom's case, we first started noticing symptoms. First of all, kind of caveat, when I first started noticing symptoms, I was like, I work at the Alzheimer's Association. Am I just looking for warning signs because that's what I do? And it slowly, over the time that I figured, I was like, no, this is really something happening with my mom. And how we sort of discovered was finances. She was really struggling with managing her money. And I'll tell you more about that as we continue this conversation. So, as we know, the financial impact of Alzheimer's disease on caregivers is very twofold. And for working caregivers or care partners, we know that it takes time to caregive. It takes time away maybe from work, or maybe people retire early from their jobs to help provide care to the person. And so income goes down. And we also know that the cost of care goes up. And so let's hear from a caregiver on their experience with caring for someone with dementia.
So when we finally moved into assisted living, when we first got the cost, it was going to be $5,000 a month. When we started adding on daily medications and housekeeping and all the other things that come with it, we were quickly at $6,000 per month. In my mind, every month I was, doing the calculations of, all right, how much money does Dad have left? How long can this last? What happens when that goes away?
I think what's really telling in the video is she was talking about the cost of care, and I did some quick, analysis on cost of care because when my mom lived in assisted living memory care, it was about $5,000 a month. And looking at, and that was like 4 years ago, and fast forward to today, if she were in the same facility needing the same cares, it's about $7,000 a month. So the cost has really increased over the last couple of years. So certainly there's some unique challenges for caregivers of people with dementia. And certainly we know that because of the price or the cost of care, that dementia caregivers have twice the out-of-pocket caregiving expenses than non-dementia caregivers do. And it also takes a toll emotionally and psychologically on caregivers, estimated at 30 to 40% of caregivers who experience depression. And I do feel like that number might be a bit low just based on people reporting. The other psychological impact is anxiety, of course, and I fall into that bucket. When I was caring for my mom and supporting her as an only child, it's a lot of responsibility and also a lot of pressure. As the only adult, child or the only child to want to get it right, I wanted to make sure that, she had the best care that, we could afford and all of the things. And, I just remember laying in bed at night, eyes on the ceiling, worrying about all of the things, like I'm sure you all do too sometimes. So anxiety and depression is really real, especially for dementia caregivers. And then women are more likely also to experience the stress of caregiving. So just another check your knowledge question. How many of you think that people younger than the age of 65 can develop Alzheimer's? Great job. That is true. And we know that people younger than 65 can also develop Alzheimer's. It's much less common, but the complications are, I would say, a little bit more challenging because people living with younger onset do sort of face unique challenges because they might still be in the workforce. They might have children at home. I remember when I first started working at the Alzheimer's Association, I worked with a family, actually it was a wife, who was caring for her husband in his 50s, I believe, and they had 4 small children at home, and they were all still school age, and so she was parenting, and she was caring for her husband, and she needed to reduce the time at work that she was, working, which then translated into a reduction in income. And they still had, several years of, work that they were looking forward to, and he had to retire early. So you can think about all of those unique challenges that maybe somebody over the age of 65 doesn't have. The other unique challenges for people living with younger onset Alzheimer's include insurance complications, Social Security disability. Navigating that when you're younger than 65 can mean sometimes denials and appeals, and it takes a little bit longer to navigate all of those challenges. Having conversations with employers on maybe needing to retire or special accommodations. And then also, as I mentioned, that just in general, people with younger onset have less time to financially plan for the future. And so that means that there's less, in savings potentially to pay for the cost of care. As a result, sometimes those younger onset care partners might have to return to work or take a different type of work or increase their hours. Most recently, I was talking with an adult daughter who, she moved her mom actually into her home, and she was working a full-time job, and then she was also needing additional income, and so she took a part-time, later evening job when mom was sleeping so that her sibling could come over and spend time with mom. So this adult daughter was doing a heck of a job being a caregiver, but she was so tired from working a full-time job during the day and then 4 hours kind of like in that overnight time frame because of the cost of care. As I mentioned, many of the younger onset care partners still have children at home, so there's school functions and all of the things that go with that. And then that translates into maybe not being able to save for children's future, like education or college or other types of family expenses. The good news is there's a lot of resources and supports that are available no matter what age of the caregiver. But for certainly younger onset caregivers, there's still some unique challenges, and that includes the 2-year waiting period for Social Security disability and Medicare eligibility. So it can be really complicated and very difficult. Other unique challenges for caregivers, specifically for different, sort of populations, would be for individuals who are LGBTQ plus. They are more likely to be single, living alone, and less likely to have children. And as we heard from our speaker this morning, that yes, it's true that it takes a village, and also people can feel very isolated. And this is especially true for this population because there's oftentimes less people that they feel like they could ask for help from. And with current climate, it might be complicated to reach out and ask for additional help, and so tend to be more isolated and need more support than what they might be getting. And then finally, additional populations that might need some additional support or have additional financial challenges include the individuals who are lower income. They may have fewer opportunities to save for the future, have a lot of debt, may be struggling to pay the bills or to cover the medical expenses that they have, which then translates into added caregiver stress. However, we're lucky we live in Minnesota because there are a lot of programs that people might be able to qualify for based on income at little to no cost.
So now let's talk about what you can do to avoid or reduce the financial strains of caregiving. We'll do another knowledge check. So who can benefit from putting financial plans in place for the future? How many people think that's just people with a lot of money? People retiring soon, caregivers, low-income households, or everyone? You guys are great. So the answer is everyone. Many people assume that financial planning is only for people who make a lot of money, but everyone can benefit from financial planning, especially those who are living with or caring for someone with a disease or chronic illness. Financial planning can help ensure care costs will be covered and prevent financial hardship in the future. There are benefits to putting financial plans in place as soon as possible for both the person receiving the care and for the caregiver. So the benefits for the caregiver include knowing the person's wishes, feeling more confident making important decisions when the person you are caring for can no longer make them, knowing how to handle financial issues and pay for care, and less chance of making costly or unwise decisions, such as taking money from life insurance, stopping insurance premium payments, or cashing in a 401k or other retirement accounts too early. So we'll hear from a caregiver as well as a dementia expert on this topic.
My mother, by putting plans in place early, that really helped me because it gives me a sense of confidence that I'm doing the things that she really wants to be done. It allows me to not have to worry about decisions that I make because my mother has already laid out the plan. She's stated her wishes, and my role is really to execute those plans. I have found that making decisions for my own situation can often be difficult. And so it's even harder to make decisions, especially when it comes to medical decisions, financial decisions. To have that responsibility of making those decisions for someone else can be very, very difficult. So in that my mother was so prepared and had laid out financial plans and really had a structure around her life, that has really allowed me to be less anxious as I perform the caregiving role.
One of the benefits of putting financial plans in place for caregivers is simply peace of mind. oftentimes we have a lot of anxiety and fear about the unknown. How long is the disease going to last? What are the care needs going to be? When we think of all of those things that we might be apprehensive about, and we put plans in place for if this happens, here's how we'll handle it. And we really think through, here's what's typical with the disease, here's what I need to be thinking about, and here's my plan for that. It can be such a gift to the whole family because people can settle in and focus on, here's what I need to focus on today, here's what I need to think about right now, without the weight of the what ifs hanging over their head.
And there are also benefits of early planning for the individual themselves, and this includes the ability to share exactly what they want to happen and help make decisions about their finances and future care. And then they have a sense of reinsurance because they know others will know their wishes and will follow them. And there's also a feeling of relief that comes from having legal and financial plans put in place. Again, we'll hear from the expert.
One benefit of planning early for the person with the disease is that they get to have their say. They get to say, here is how I want things to play out. If there's ever a time when I can't live alone or when I need this kind of care, here's how I'd like that to happen. Here's who I want to be making decisions on my behalf if I can't make them for myself. So they get to have their say. In addition, they get to make choices about how they live their life, what they do now and in the months and years to come, with this additional knowledge of, hey, I've got this disease and here's what I can expect. And so a lot of people tell us that they choose differently, and they choose differently from each other. I talked to one person with Alzheimer's who said, you know what, I want every day to be regular. I want to work in my flower beds. I want to play with my grandkids. I want to have lunch with a friend. I just want lots of great regular days. I've talked to other folks with dementia diseases who said, I want to do the things I've been looking forward to. I want to take some big trips, or I want to do some really special things with the people I'm close to. So it's not the same for everybody, but the person with the disease gets to make choices and gets to live life more on their terms.
So let's learn about how to start the financial planning process. In order to get started, you'll need to have conversations about money with the person for who you provide care for. And know that even people who are comfortable with managing their own money may find it difficult to discuss someone else's finances. So talking about money can make people anxious or uncomfortable. It may be hard to know how to start these conversations, but there are some things that you can do to make them more positive and productive. To feel more confident when starting a conversation about finances, it can be helpful to write down your goals and financial documents you will want to review or discuss. Identify which family members or close friends should be a part of the financial planning process. And these include individuals that the person living with the disease trusts or who knows about the person's medical and financial situation. Have the discussion at a calm time of day and in a quiet place. This can lower stress and anxiety for everyone involved. And encourage the person to be honest about their assets and expenses, as well as for what's important to them. And finally, don't rush. Planning takes time. Focus on the easy wins first and building from those successes. So consider these additional tips for when having a discussion about someone else's finances. Be patient and understanding. It can be hard to ask for and accept help about managing finances, especially for someone living with dementia. Ask about the person's wishes for their finances and future care. Explain that planning early is important so that you can honor those wishes. Don't judge the person and their decision. Everyone handles money in their own way, and the goal is to come to an agreement on how the person's money will be managed when they are no longer able to do so. If the person has difficulty communicating, it may be helpful to use short sentences in simple terms. So pause at times to make sure the person understands what you're saying, or repeat what you have said so they make sure that you're understanding correctly. And if the conversation becomes stressful, take a break and try talking again later. It's okay for financial planning to be a process that happens over time. And try to end on a positive note. These conversations are difficult for everyone. And check in regularly. A person's financial situation can change as care needs change. Plan to discuss finances once a year or when there's a major change in the person's situation or health. We'll hear from a caregiver and find out what worked well for her when she had a financial conversation with her mother.
Advice I'd have for other caregivers if the conversation about finances doesn't go well at first is to keep trying. It took a while for my mom to come around, and I was exasperated. I would try to catch her at a good moment, and sometimes she'd give me a little tidbit here or there, so it might take time to just pull it all together. It's sort of trying to understand the moment if you're having a good time. What I did also was to bring up friends. My mother was very empathetic, so if I'd say, oh, remember so-and-so? They had a situation with their mom or dad or family member where something happened and the person didn't know what to do or they didn't have understanding about it. So that was really hard on them. She'd say, oh, really? And I'd say, yeah, see, that would help me if, we talked about that kind of thing. And that would usually get her. So in my case, that empathy is what I would kind of try to use for her to open up more, but continuing to do it, catching on a good day, that was key because it took time and it was piecemeal. Small victories, just get as much as you can over time and keep at it, because there usually will be a window where you can kind of break through, or in some cases it might be someone else has to talk to them.
So when starting these conversations, it can be helpful to begin with a positive statement as it builds confidence and connection with the person you're caring for. For example, you could say, I've always admired the way you handle your finances. I want to learn more about what works well for you. Or, I've noticed you seem worried about finances these days. What worries you the most? What can I do to help? I respect your privacy, but it would give me peace of mind to know that you have financial plans in place so I can follow your wishes. And if you're starting a conversation about your own financial wishes for the future, you could say, I want to talk with you about my finances so you can access them in case of an emergency. Or I really want you to understand my wishes for the future. Let's talk about how I want my finances managed. So here is a handout that can guide you in having these conversations about finances. It will be included in your activity handout.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about avoiding financial abuse and fraud. So before we do that, we have another check your knowledge. On average, how much money do Americans age 80 and older lose each year as a result of financial abuse, fraud, or scams? So raise your hand if you think it's $5,200. Okay, $10,500. We have a number of hands. $15,700. A couple of hands. And $39,200. All right, well, you'd be surprised because the answer is $39,200. And this is just like, when I first saw that number, I was like, oh my goodness. But I have a number of examples of caregivers who I have heard stories of scams happening to them, depleting life savings. And my mom was almost one of them. So remember earlier in the presentation when I was telling you about my mom and the signs and symptoms, and I was like, is this because I work at the Alzheimer's Association, or does she really have some signs and symptoms? She received a phone call, and the phone call was the Publishers Clearinghouse people calling because she won, $1 million. And all she needed to do was go to the bank and get a money order for $30,000, I think was the amount, and send it to this P.O. box. And the good news of the story is she went to the bank, and because I had been to the bank with her a number of times, had, secretly slipped the banker and the bank manager and all the people like, hey, if you notice anything weird, please call me. They actually did. And so they called, they went in the back room and said, let me just go check and see if we have that much money, Barb, and, before we give you this money. And so they called me, and I thankfully picked up, and I was like, oh, please don't give her that money. And they didn't do it. So thankfully, she is not in this statistic, but this happens, and I'm sure you probably all know this, but this happens quite frequently. So financial abuse and dementia. Financial abuse can occur in any setting at any time, and I feel like this is just becoming more prevalent in today's world. Individuals living with dementia do have a greater chance of becoming victims, and it's because this is a brain disorder. It impacts judgment, it impacts memory, it impacts the ability to use common sense, so to speak. They may not remember, or they may not report abuse because they don't think it's abuse, and they may struggle to make good financial decisions. I have worked with a number of caregivers who have shared stories of sort of witnessing, going to visit mom and opening up, the closet door, and out rolls all this stuff, all these supplements or vitamins that, mom's never taken because she's been on auto, delivery, and things just keep falling out of the closet, only to the tune of, thousands of dollars spent and wasted on things that never were needed in the first place. So let's hear from an expert on financial abuse and dementia.
People living with dementia are more susceptible perhaps to fraud and financial abuse than other people because they have a disease that's attacking their brain. And so their ability to solve problems, to think about things logically, to have insight may be impaired, and they may be able to be tricked by people they trust or people who seem nice or seem trustworthy in a way that they wouldn't have been at an earlier time.
So here are some signs that a person might be having problems with their memory, and a good opportunity to have a conversation. There could be unopened bills lying around, or perhaps electricity or gas gets shut off, probably due to unpaid bills, perhaps unusual or large purchases. That's the example of the woman that had all the vitamins kind of spilling out of the closet. Multiple of the same item or things that they don't need. My mom started purchasing like really expensive makeup, and I was like, what is this? She never was an expensive makeup sort of gal. So it was just an unusual change in shopping pattern that also kind of led me down a path of what is really happening here. Repeated donations to telemarketers, the number of calls because my parents were generous, they owned a business, they did, make donations over the years, but the number of calls that kept coming in for donations that seemed suspicious to me were quite large. Missing money or unexplained bank withdrawals are certainly another sign that somebody might be having some troubles with their money. So here are some ways that you can lower the risk of abuse or fraud. Agree to a spending limit on credit cards, although that was something that my mom did not agree to. We had to really talk through, do we really need all of these credit cards, or could we simplify things? And so we were able to slowly, over time, reduce the number of cards she had access to. So a spending limit on credit cards, creating a separate account for recreational spending, and then a separate account for some of those larger purchases or larger items like mortgage, car payments, etc. And having that be with a caregiver might be an example of how to lower that risk. Set up auto pay for bills. This was another thing that my mom really struggled with. Balancing her checkbook was like her hobby. Before dementia, she loved down to the penny, every other day when I would talk with her, it would seem, what are you doing? I'm balancing my checkbook. Well, as the signs really started to, really blink, warning, go get checked out. When I would call her, she would describe, I've been sitting at my kitchen table for hours, and I don't know where, my $300 from this, account is, and she was really confused. And really, I think what it all came down to was just a lot of information, and so shortly after, we set up auto payment for bills just to make sure that the bills were paid. Setting up automatic notifications for large purchases or withdrawals can be helpful. Requesting certainly those bank statements and credit card statements from the caregiver. signing up for the do not call list, although, I'm sure you all probably have, and we still get those scam calls. But we do our best to try to limit those calls. And then asking credit card companies to stop sending balance transfer checks or trying to help with the mail and weeding out some of those apply for a new credit card type situations. So now we're going to hear from a caregiver on their story.
So one of the things that I did, my father was very proud. He really didn't want to admit that he had Alzheimer's. So I wanted him to be able to continue to feel good about himself. So I actually set up a checking savings account for him that was joint with me. Because again, I had power of attorney, so I could move things around a bit. I made sure that he always had $200 in that account. Everything else was protected, and he really didn't have access to it anymore. But he didn't know that because he still had that $200. A couple of years into his diagnosis, he actually had somebody stop at his home. He was outside working in his yard. They came by, a couple, old car, and pulled up to the driveway. They had a child with them and said their child was ill. And they said they needed money for health care for this child. My father was always very generous as he became older and as he became more impaired with Alzheimer's. He became more generous. And so his inclination was to help this couple. They took him to the credit union. They asked him to withdraw all of his funds, so he did. He had access to that $200 that he knew about, and he gave it to them. They left him there in the parking lot, and he walked home. So it was really awful that happened to him, but his money was protected because of the safeguards that we had put up. Everything else was still there, and I was able to replace that $200. So we tried very hard to do everything we could to protect him financially, but also to make sure that we didn't take away his sense of self-esteem.
All right, and then we do have another handout. It's avoiding financial abuse and fraud, and certainly there's some really great checklists here on how to help reduce the risk. And I'm just curious, just show of hands, did you all receive the handout, the activity of managing money? You might have received it electronically. I just want to be sure that you all had access. If not, there is a sign-in form that's being passed around. If you listed your email address, we'd be happy to email it to you, this week when we're back in the office. So if you're interested in that, please make sure that you write that on that sheet that's being floated around. All right.
So many caregivers avoid or delay making financial decisions and legal plans, and it can feel stressful to think about the future, especially when you're caring for someone with a chronic illness. Jobs, family responsibilities, and other duties can make it hard to find the time to organize financial and legal matters for yourself or for someone else. But as we've discussed, it's important to put out plans in place as early as possible, and you can make the process easier by breaking things into simple steps and doing one task at a time. So let's look into some of these steps, many of which you can complete without a financial advisor or an attorney. So the first step in organizing finances and making a plan to cover care costs is to look at income and spending. So write down cash in and cash out, see if there's places to cut back on your spending, and build up savings for unexpected care costs. And then we will hear from two caregivers and their ways that they were able to save money.
One thing that I would suggest is when you have those monthly bills is to call. I had cable, and I said, hey, I can't pay this amount when I'm looking at all of the bills that we had. And they didn't want to lose me as a customer, so they reduced the cost of the cable. Also, the medical bills, even though you get a demand for payment for a certain amount of money, call them, go on the payment plan, talk to the hospital about a payment plan, talk to the different utilities. I was on a budget for heat, I was on a budget for electricity. Reach out and ask, and don't do all those calls at one day. Break it up and do one at a time so you don't get overwhelmed with it.
keeping within a budget. The budget is really, really important for food, because it's very tempting to go into a grocery store and find all kinds of delicacies. So that's been a big change and a good one. We found that for the two of us, we were spending a lot of money on groceries. So taking a look at that is really helped.
So the next thing to do is to take inventory of assets and debts. So assets are anything owned that has value, like a house, a car, a bank account, or stock. And then debt is money that is borrowed and paid out over time, like a credit card or a loan. Another important step in making financial action plans is to identify the costs of care, both now and in the future. Keep in mind that medical or other kinds of insurance may pay for some of the costs, but it may not cover all of them. Care costs could include things like ongoing medical treatment, prescription drugs, personal care supplies, adult day services, in-home care services, and full-time residential care services. Since Alzheimer's is a progressive disease, caregivers will also eventually need to assume many ongoing financial responsibilities, including paying the bills, arranging for benefit claims, making investment decisions, and preparing tax returns. So again, this handout walks you through the covering of care costs. This will be in the activity workbook. And now Heidi will talk about the common funding sources to help cover the costs of care.
Yeah, as we mentioned, certainly there's the obvious funding sources to cover the cost of care, like income, maybe retirement accounts, savings, of course. And then, most people know about Medicare. What a lot of people don't necessarily understand is that Medicare does not cover the cost of long-term care and also does not cover the cost of in-home care. So that's when, it's time to get creative. And again, I like to say that the good news is, for those of us that live in Minnesota, we are fortunate that there are a number of waivered programs based on eligibility, and there's different eligibility requirements that people might be eligible for. So I know Aging Pathways is here. They have a table formerly known as the Senior Linkage Line. They are excellent resources to think about or to talk to when the time comes on what programs people might be eligible for to cover care. Certainly, there's other types of, respite grants and those types of things, and both the Alzheimer's Association and Aging Pathways would have information about that. So our helpline here is listed 24/7 at the bottom of this slide, and we have a really great website that can give some additional information on those types of programs and resources. Madeline?
So legal planning makes sure that you or a trusted family member or friend can make decisions for the person living with the disease when they can no longer make those decisions themselves. Like we've discussed with making financial plans, it's important to make legal plans as early as you can so that everyone is well prepared. Putting legal plans in place doesn't have to be stressful or difficult. Getting legal advice and services from an attorney who specializes in elder law can be helpful. However, you can complete many of the documents on your own, and we'll hear from a caregiver about how she was able to complete most of these documents without professional help.
Most of these resources you can access online. You can access from multiple different entities. And I did most of all of her documents that were necessary: the power of attorney, the living will, the healthcare power of attorney, the financial power of attorney. All of those things you can access, and you can get them notarized and legal documents created. So don't let that be a hindrance to take care of those items, because those items are really, really important early on in the disease. If you wait, it's only going to cause more problems. So the earlier you get it, the better. And don't be afraid of the nuances of all these documents and all these papers. It's pretty simplified if you research it. There's a really simple way to go about it and take care of it as soon as possible.
So in organizing legal plans, it's important to start by taking inventory of any legal documents that are already in place. Review them and make updates if you need to. At the very least, make sure you have the following documents. They're sometimes referred to as advanced directives, and make sure they are up to date and in place. So a durable power of attorney for both finance and healthcare. These allow a person to name someone else to make financial and health-related decisions when they can no longer do so themselves. And a living will, which will explain a person's wishes for medical treatment near the end of life. Again, this is a take-home that you can utilize when organizing legal plans. And if you need help finding a legal professional, consider using these sources. So the Alzheimer's Association and AARP Community Resource Finder. There's the Elder Care Locator, the National Elder Law Foundation, Legal Services Corporation, the American Association of Elder Law Attorneys, and then for financial, it would be the Association of Financial Professionals, Association of International Certified Professional Accountants, Consumer Credit Counseling Services, or the U.S. Bankruptcy Court Trustee's Office.
All right, just to wrap up then, in terms of creating a backup plan, I think a lot of us, like to think of our plan A and maybe our plan B, but it's also good to have a plan C, right? So in terms of a backup plan, anytime that you're caregiving for someone, you really want to make sure that, or try to make sure that there is somebody that can step into your shoes to fulfill the responsibilities if you're not able to continue either short-term or long-term. So that could be a family, a friend, or somebody else that the person that you're providing care to has been close with. So designating that trusted backup agent, not only for finances, but also for healthcare directives could be really important. And then just in terms of a backup plan, it's also important to keep in mind those medications and having a list of medical information for the backup person in the event that that is needed as well. And then just a word about taking care of your health. I know at the beginning of the presentation, we talked a little bit about caregivers. And there's susceptibility to, sort of putting themselves on the back burner for the sake of the person they're providing care for. But we know that as a caregiver, the best thing you can do for the person you're caring for is to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And that really does include not only your physical health, but your mental health and emotional health as well. So making sure you're getting in all of your doctor's appointments and asking for help and being specific with what help you need and support you need from others is really important. So thank you very much. Again, we're with the Alzheimer's Association. There's a number of great resources that we have, including our 24/7 helpline. Our helpline is staffed in over 200 languages that we're really proud of. So certainly reach out anytime, day or night, whether you're a professional or a person caring for someone with dementia or you're just concerned yourself. Happy to answer any questions along with our website at alz.org. And then we do have a great community resource finder, which is listed there on the screen. And this is to find available not only Alzheimer's Association programs like this one, but also support groups and different types of care in the community, whether it's home health or memory care or adult day. We have lists all on that community resource finder. So I think because you didn't receive the worksheet, we'd be happy, like I mentioned, to email those out. So please make sure that your email is listed on the attendance form. And with that, I know we're probably pushing on time. There might be like 2 minutes for questions if there are any. Otherwise, I can stay around a little. We can stay a little bit extra too in the event that we run out of time. So I do see that there is a question in the back row. Sure.
When you were talking about the fraud and stuff, we did look up the do not call.
Yeah.
.gov. That site's not available now with the government shutdown.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
just an informational point.
I know. It depends on the day. Yeah, I was talking about the National Institute of Health website and talking about treatments in a presentation earlier in the week, and I'm like, oh, wait, just kidding. But maybe someday. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. All right, well, thank you. Thank you very much for your attention and for being here and for all you do to help support people with dementia. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the conference.